obviously you're an astrophysicist, Dr. Rudolf Schild from Harvard. Could you give us a brief introduction of yourself?
I'd be very happy to. And actually, I'm a member of the Harvard-Smithsonian Center of Astrophysics. We operate a lot of spacecraft on NASA contracts, so there are several spacecraft that we send the download commands that tell those spacecraft to reorient itself to a different object like an X-ray source, and then start the exposure and terminate the exposure and read the camera, and later on we'll give it commands to download the data to Earth and so on. So that's what we do. Formally, I'm an employee of the Smithsonian Institution.
Okay.
But I've taught courses at the Center for Astrophysics to the graduate students in the past, and most people at the observatory don't particularly care about whose title it is and whose department it is, because we're on joint programs and missions together. And I have to tell you, it's such a fascinating place to be with 350 research scientists, all operating spacecraft and trying to figure out what these observations now are telling us about the nature of the universe. It's really fun to be at the epicenter of all of this activity. So consciousness means a lot of different things. And so the principal one that I believe we understand is I'm a being who can say to himself, I am aware of myself, and even can say, I'm aware that I'm aware. And we have to ask ourselves, what does that feeling mean? What does that represent in the universe of reality and physical existence versus quantum reality? And those are all questions that are related to the nature of consciousness. But of course, consciousness is more than that. It's my ability to take in information largely through the left brain, that is the visual centers, the hearing centers, and the feeling and touch sensors. That mostly appears in the left brain. And then having a soul connection operating at the same time in the brain allows me to express opinions about that input from the left brain. So if I see a lion, I know this is not a safe place to be. Let's get the hell out of here. And so those opinions can be life-sustaining. And that's the principal component of consciousness. It allows you to bring the wealth of experience of your past life into the present situation and make intelligent judgments about what's happening now. And that is a major function of consciousness. But it also then is the thing that allows me to sit back and contemplate, well, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to have consciousness? Do animals have consciousness? Do plants have consciousness? And I'm now in a position to take on all of these questions, because while you have no difficulty reading in textbooks written by college students everywhere, read the statement, we don't know what consciousness is, I think that's absolute nonsense. I think we understand very, very well what consciousness is, but there's a community of people that aren't comfortable with this knowledge because they might have to learn some quantum physics. Oh dear.
Oh my.
Oh my. And so it's so much easier for a professor in a psychology class to simply repeat again, well, we don't know what consciousness is. Well, I know.
And that's what attracted me to you so much. And in your definition of consciousness, I noticed you used the word soul, you used the words past lives. And so how is this all connected? Because you're one of the few scientists I've come across who's brave enough to venture on that territory and just go ahead and say it.
But you're only even halfway there. It's going to get worse before it gets better. We're going to have to deal with cosmic consciousness, with cosmic intelligence before this is over. Because in the minds of increasingly many scientists today, we have to deal with the fact that the universe believes that it's on some courses and has some behaviors consistently that really look like they were stuck into the into the universe. And we now have a word for those. We talk about how these things are templates, or sometimes they're called patternings that get transmitted down. So just like in sexual reproduction, the genetic matter of the adult parents gets passed on to the children at this time. In the same way, these patterns and these structurings of nature seem to come up again and again. And the kinds of things I'm talking here about patternings in nature are the laws of evolution. The handmaiden of the law of evolution is the principle of diversity. The universe seems to be built in such a way as to produce the greatest diversity of outcomes to the little seemingly random events that happen in our lives every day. Like we walk out the door, we see a squirrel in the tree, and therefore we're so busy watching the squirrel that we didn't notice the step that's in our path now, and we trip on the step. All of those little seeming coincidences perhaps have some meaning and reflect a larger purpose of our lives and our existence. And the way the universe works in this case is that it works with the human being, so that probably the parents intend that the child should learn this or that the human adult knows that there are responses to situations that are needed time and again, and you eventually learn which pattern is most successful in your life, and you try to lay that onto your child. And it's his job to rebel at this point, obviously.
Clearly.
But though you correctly identify these as the patternings that just come up naturally in our lives, so naturally that we're hardly aware that they exist. And yet we can now understand that they are so fundamental in our mental processing, they're in our memory of past events, and our soul being is sort of described as the sum total of all of that. And it's available to us through our soul connection, and not forgotten in the universe, and accessible to us for us to make intelligent and life-sustaining decisions in our lives. It's actually consciousness waves, or it's the actual operation of consciousness that has that patterning. And we can get into that a little bit if you like. Our civilization knows from the work of the great quantum mechanic theoreticians of the 1920s and 30s era. The theoreticians know today that there is a description of nature that we call the quantum field that's just as fundamental to existence and reality as our thoughts about them. And the quantum description of something like the electron that's, say, at the very point of my finger here. Imagine I have a pointed finger, and at the very point, there's an atom. So what is the quantum representation of that atom? What does that look like in quantum space? And that electron and proton that we call an atom will sit at the tip of my finger, but the wave pattern that's describing it will be something like a sphere. Imagine a sphere that is now centered on the atom itself. That sphere represents where it's probable that if you detect the electron or the proton atom in the atom's nucleus, then wherever that probability is the highest, that's where you're most likely to find it. So that's the quantum interpretation of simply there being an electron at the tip of my finger.
Okay.
So these quantum waves now arrange themselves, and the quantum wave for the next line is just displaced and very similar. And there's another atom below that, probably an atom of carbon or a molecule of water. And so that's just a little further down the finger. And so these spherical structures describing the quantum state of the atom, we now understand as having a place in the universe. We call it now the quantum field. And we have that way of describing physical matter. But now you correctly raise the point that we have this consciousness in the world. And what would be the quantum description of that? And interestingly, the waves that describe any intellectual content in the universe are now what we call consciousness waves since their discovery by Wilhelm Reich in the 1950s era. And these are these cyclical waves, so associated with my body and on the scale of my brain, cyclical waves are being generated that have an essentially spiraling shape. And if I could describe them with a mechanical analog, well, the coil spring of a car. You know that that's a spring that's about this big and this big around. And if I could hold it in my hand, and you would see it spiraling up. Now imagine that there's a little energy center somewhere on that coil spring and that it's moving around. Well, that's what my consciousness wave looks like. It's a wave of the motion of this energy body along the length of the coil spring. That's my consciousness wave. Now, the consciousness waves that describe ordinary consciousness and that we all know how to do from childhood learning, those, as I say, are about the size of my brain, and those are just spiraling out away from me. Now, however, the universe also has a special product called a superconsciousness wave. And superconsciousness is recognized in our civilization. It seems that some people have it and most of us don't. And it seems that you develop it by being a highly psychic person, by studying religion and philosophy, and you then begin to interpret, perhaps as a gift from very enlightened, superconscious people, you begin to develop in your brain the ability to make waves which aren't circling around like on a coil spring at a constant diameter, but rather concentrate to a point that's focused on the brain and are spiraling to ever larger sizes in the universe. And that means they can now describe the physical structure of ever larger things in the universe. So they can describe the structure of a tiny grain of sand that will be a little one that's busy at the local level of the brain, and then is expanding out to eventually become a big brain. And so that puts a grain of sand in some kind of conscious connection with an asteroid, or maybe just a rock, or a whole planet, or a star, a galaxy, a cluster of galaxies. All of these things have a spin to them, and so therefore they would have spinning waves of this kind, like the consciousness waves. And so these kinds of waves we will call superconsciousness waves, and that allows us to be in sync or in coherence with an even broader part of the universe. And if, as I am now suspecting, that the universe is in rotation, this mechanism of superconsciousness waves would allow us to be in some kind of mental communication with the entire universe. That is approaching the creator, the cosmic intelligence. Because obviously the cosmic intelligence would have superconsciousness waves of this scale and be aware of all the life within the universe in this way.
You're making my job easy for me because you've just described my next question, which was, how then do you define superconsciousness? And you got into the whole territory of this cosmic intelligence. Could you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yes, I'd be very glad to, because this is something that's very difficult and going to have to challenge our civilization in the near future. Already we're starting to see in quantum physics that it's getting harder and harder to accept that our universe is just an accident and that there was no inspired, intelligent design of the universe. It seems that the purpose of the universe was for life to emerge and thrive, and for that life to have consciousness, because in doing so, that conscious sentient life glorifies the creator. So it fulfills the mission of the cosmic intelligence that created the universe. How could that not be the purpose of the universe?
So what is the purpose of the universe?
The purpose of the universe is for life to emerge and thrive and come to understand and glorify the creator and the creation.
Beautiful. When I hear you talk about, I think, I want some of that. How do I tap into this super consciousness then?
Absolutely. I consider a success of mine to have brought you to this point, and people do want to come in contact with this. And it seems that some people can do this and some people cannot. This we notice in particular in conjunction with the phenomena of the UFO. It seems that when the UFO appears, it is often seen in a flooding of the area with a very bright light, which, however, many people do not see. There are some people who can be walking down the street in the middle of the daytime and suddenly notice in the sky that there is this persistent little light up there that they can see. But if they ask me, Rudy, you see that light in the sky? I will have to honestly say no, because they have something in their brain that allows to see a three-dimensional kind of light, where most of the light that you and I see, the light generated by these lamps that illuminate the scene, is just two-dimensional. It's little waves that are doing oscillation like this, and their polarization means the oscillations can go up this way or they can go in and out this way. But in the end, they're not the same as a spiraling wave, which is fully three-dimensional now. And it's these three-dimensional waves that then accompany superconsciousness. And it seems that this is seen most in the ability of some people to see this light, which I believe I cannot see. That light is most intent at the horizon of the universe, and it's also seen at the brilliant surfaces of the black holes, which I will eventually be describing to you as being not really the technical definition of a black hole, but really meeting another definition which is always accompanied by a very, very bright light, as bright as the universe knows how to make.
Dr. Schild, we hear a lot about how our thoughts and our beliefs create our own reality. One of the things in my practice that I go on about is how our external worlds reflect our inner worlds. What I'm wondering is, what is the science behind that?
Oh, beautiful question. Let's start out with thoughts creating our reality. Remember that our thoughts are currents in our brain, and this is not a speculation. This is what we photograph routinely in functional magnetic resonance imaging and other brain study techniques where a helmet is put over a subject's head, and the brain waves that are generated in the course of the interview are recorded, and then we can see how there are correlates or correlations between the brainwave pattern and the content of the material being discussed. So we can actually see these and measure these. Now, one thing that we learn from this work is that any emotional content or description, like the concept of feeling happy, the happy response, that's a brain pattern that's in the brain. And so if I am in the routine habit of feeling happy, that reinforces those brain circuits that describe the happy wave in the brain. And so in reinforcing them, it makes me see happy all around because my brain can match the happiness there and the happiness there and the happiness there. And so in matching that happiness, my brain is further reinforced. So that's what you mean by you create your reality. The brain waves pick up on the things that you're concentrating on, reinforce those patterns of thought, and help you then to see those same patterns in other situations in nature. Isn't that creating your reality?
Yes, sounds like it to me. The phrase, where attention goes, energy flows. Is that scientifically sound?
Oh, absolutely. The way I parse that question, the question is this sound reasoning that where the attention goes, the energy flows? Your mind is a one-way street. It's both transmitting, especially exchanging memory with your soul body and the memory of your opinions, as well as the memory of your experiences of the physical world. That all gets recorded in your soul entity. Ultimately, that's structuring of the black hole, but never mind about that. Anyway, so those brain waves associated with where your attention is going are focused by the brain, especially on that object of your attention, and you're raising the quantum level of that intended target causes it to begin its mental processing and seeing what the attention is doing to it and what opinion does it have about that. As I said before, this whole consciousness thing is about having opinions. Left brain information is compared with your right brain resonance with the universe, which allows your past experiences to inform opinions about your new experience, your current experience, the one that's confronting your brain right now, and that's being registered on the right side. And then at the center of the brain, those two come together and get compared. And mathematically, we call that a correlation. But don't be troubled by the mathematics. We can say it with two-syllable words and simply say that it's the brain attending to the new information, which it does by seeing if the brain patterns match.
I see. So if based on your opinion that you formulated from that process.
Yeah.
You generate a good feeling space. You then experience it in your external world.
That's correct. And in fact, the space feels it too.
Oh.
Just don't forget that the universe is interconnected, and if I can affect another object, it can affect me. It's a two-way street, and not all objects are sentient, that is, have the ability to compare to a soul being. My chair doesn't have a soul being, and so it doesn't make opinions about my sitting on it. It's a physical object, does not have a consciousness. But the average subject that I give my attention to does have a sense of my appreciation or otherwise of it. And so we're both interacting with each other through this quantum means and through the brain's activities.
And emotion, I define as energy in motion.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good way to think about it. That is to say, I feel and experience emotions as a brain wave. And the brain wave is in response to some input on the left brain, most probably. And so an emotion is the brain's responding to the new input information and having an opinion about it. It might be that it guides me to go in self-preservation mode. We teach spacecraft to go into stationary mode, just shut down. And when we tell you, you start up again. So the brain is acting like some of our machines in this case. And emotion implies that this process of exchanging thoughts and considerations of whatever it is we're talking about, that's understood as a quantum process.
Okay. So if somebody is experiencing an opinion based on trauma or unprocessed emotion, how is that going to affect them?
Oh boy. It's a little bit hard for me to know because this is, there are so many forms of these trauma. There are battlefield scars. There are trauma associated with perhaps childbirth even, but also with disciplinary action. And so all of these things have to be discussed, and it's hard to find an umbrella discussion that includes all of them.
It is.
But let's talk about the classic one where a soldier returning from a battle zone has been exposed to sights that he was not prepared for. Nobody ever told this soldier that he was going to see his best buddies with bullets in their head and feel the great sorrow of that person not seeing the fulfillment of his life. And that is traumatic, and traumatic is a brain pattern which we would rather not have in our brain. We would not have that traumatic experience popping up when we're out to have a nice day at the beach and enjoy the sunlight. We don't want that clouded over by painful memories. That's post-traumatic stress syndrome that we're carrying along as baggage with us.
What is the best way then to free that from your quantum field so that you don't continue to re-experience it?
I would say that you would probably want that individual to have an escape route, to suggest to that individual that he establish in his life what would be called a safe space. It might be a favorite chair that you sit in. It might be you're sitting at the foot of your bed where you can think about your whole body participating in this, but at the same time see the perspective of, but it's really the mind, because my body wasn't injured in this experience. My mind got injured somehow by seeing my buddy shot dead. And the tremendous sorrow I felt that his life would be not further realized. So what I absolutely do not want to do is fortify those brain patterns in my thinking, but rather I want to go to my safe place and imagine my sitting in my favorite chair where I'm always comfortable and where I like to go and think about what I can do with my life, putting aside whatever was troubling me when I decided to go into my safe space.
Something that I'm looking at is there any kind of value that we can get out of the negative charge, so to speak? Or perhaps to put it differently, do we evolve through crisis, both emotionally and otherwise on a collective level? What is your opinion on that?
My opinion is not very aligned with that of the medical community. And I don't want to offend anybody there by saying things that are obviously stupid. However, I will venture what I understand about the part that relates to cosmological physics. And that is to simply observe that a person who has been traumatized does carry the scars of this as brainwave patterns, which will tend to erase themselves naturally when other patternings, such as the enjoyment of a new hobby, or maybe a marriage or my child's marriage, maybe that causes the brain to shift and develop brain waves that are part of some other experience, and that the ones that are part of the traumatic experience are thereby lessened.
I see.
So ordinarily, I believe your life's work will have a tendency to simply wash out the trauma. But I defer to the experience of professionals who treat trauma to modify or correct that statement.
I sometimes say pain is the touchstone for spiritual growth.
Certainly, pain gets your attention. And so pain causes you to first eliminate the source of pain, but how can eliminating the source of the pain not be the thing that causes to elevate your spiritual being? Because if it's painful, I want to shut it out of my life. So that's probably a machinery that's built into us to head us in the right direction.
So you're saying it catalyzes action.
It catalyzes
to move into the other direction.
The correct actions. It allows us to do the thing that's best for us. Isn't that amazing that that's built in?
It is amazing. Fascinating, actually. Do you think that pain then can lead to, perhaps it's an avenue to superconsciousness?
Very much so. I think it causes us to stretch to cast our nets wider and deeper, to look for sources of relief of the pain. And that's going in the direction of superconsciousness.
Yes. Well, we've already ventured very much in the territory of sentience. What is your definition of sentience?
Sentience is hardly distinguished from awareness, and I talked about the sense of awareness. And if I may return to that discussion now to answer the question about sentience, awareness has to do with the fact that the brain is operating like a computer in this mode, and it's driven by the heartbeat. We know that the beta frequency is something like the 16th heartbeat of 1 hertz. That is to say, it's something like 16 hertz in a band centered at around that frequency. And so those consciousness waves now are coming along at the rate of 1 every 16th second. And that's what allows me to say, I am aware of myself, so that if something lands on my foot, I will be aware of that. And I know that in another 16th of a second, there will be another awareness cycle. And I will be aware of whether removing that object from my foot has alleviated the pain. And so the pain can come and go, and I can be a witness to that. And the fact that I could say to myself, I'm aware of the pain, and in another moment, after I move this thing that's resting on my foot, that pain will go away. I'm sure that will. I can plan on that pain being gone. So that's awareness. Can you see that awareness follows from the clocking pulse generated in my brain that allows me to know that there will be another compute cycle a 16th of a second later, and another, and another, and another, and another. And in those, I can check on my sense of awareness. And I can go on and calculate, I'm aware that I'm aware that I'm aware. And I know that in the next cycle, I can make that 4 awares. And in the next cycle, again, 5 aware. I can just keep going. That's awareness. Now, sentience is distinguished from that in that my awareness cycles can be affected by other people around me. And I can often know that that person is focused on me and thinking about me from their body motions, but also there's something in my mind that communicates more telepathically and tells me that I'm in the presence of this other individual. That's then the sentience function of the brain. It's not comparing awareness cycles so much as spreading out my brain's function to include the brain functioning of the people that I'm with, such as yourself. And it's trying to understand what you're communicating to me, just as I'm trying in my sentient existence to communicate to you what's going on in my awareness cycles.
I see. Because in one of your lectures, I heard you say sentience is resonating with the rest of the universe.
That's correct. And that's looking in a much broader context, where I'm now speaking of my mind having these brain waves that go out for other people, perhaps on a distant star, to tune into and pick up on and be aware of what I'm thinking. And yesterday I told you how astronauts have had the experience of being aware of the brain functioning of an elephant in extreme cases of disorientation.
How is that possible?
Perhaps I had better recount what we discussed last night when I was talking about something astronaut Edgar Mitchell told me that affects astronauts trying to perform their work in the space environment, which Edgar stressed was extremely disorienting, because just as we as earthbound citizens know that there will be a sunrise and a sunset every 24 hours, in a spacecraft, that sunrise and sunset occurs every 90 minutes. And so it can't regulate my life cycles the same way I'm used to having the sun's risings and settings adjust my life's daily cycle. And so the astronaut has that disorientation about time, but also there's a disorientation about space, because there's no feeling of weight, because you're in an orbit around the Earth, and that makes you weightless. And so I don't know as an astronaut where my down is the way I am right here in my chair, and I feel my down in my bottom. So that orientation, that orienting effect is lost to the astronauts, and it sometimes, in extreme cases, causes them to lose their soul connection, and to pick up the soul connection of another sentient being that might even be an animal being, and in the one case called to my attention was literally an elephant. That means not that in my mind's eye I see an elephant, but rather I share the experience of living with an elephant. Most likely, the elephant is in a state of terror because he knows that when he's in this desert and the two mountains are lined up just that way, usually he finds his tree next to his watering hole, and oh my God, I gotta have water soon now, and where's the watering hole? I should be able to see it. Let's see, it's the mountains are right and left is correct, and where's the tree? This is serious. In other words, the astronaut is actually having the elephant's experience, not picturing elephant, but really sharing the experience of that animal in the savannah.
So he's picking up on that's just incredible. He's picking up on the actual feelings of the elephant is
other sentient creature in the universe.
So what does that tell us about feelings then, on a telepathic level and beyond?
Yes. So it tells us that feelings are not just expressions of something in the mind, but they're shared with everybody in the universe. That our intelligence and our sentient being and the activity in the brains are leaking out of our brains and can be picked up by attuned individuals who are very sensitive to this. We call them mystics.
Yes. Can you explain how mirror neurons prove that sentience is actually interlinked with consciousness?
We've actually learned a great deal about the brain's functioning by these studies, primarily with primates, monkeys, because it's very difficult to get permission to do studies on human beings. You have to get all kinds of permissions from the Human Studies Board for your community, and that will require a licensing procedure and all of that. Now, when we study monkeys, there's a difficulty in communicating with them. They can't explain to us what they're feeling, but we can by putting the electrodes helmets on the monkey or using an fMRI machine or whatever. We can study the brainwave patterns with monkeys. And some of the most interesting studies of this kind were done in Parma, Italy by a Professor Rizzoliti and his research group at the University of Parma. Around 1997 and 1998, the studies were being done, and the principal one of note here was the study of monkeys in a cage who were being fed a peanut, where suddenly the machinery, the apparatus in front of them would rattle a little bit, and a peanut would appear on a little shelf in front of the monkey. And normally the monkey would reach and grab that peanut and eat it, and that became known as the reach and grab monkey, the monkey reach and grab reflex. And the brainwave pattern associated with that for the monkey was observed and recorded. Now, that was all fine and good it was seen that if the monkey is presented a second peanut in the same way, that the monkey's brain will respond the same way, and he will again take the peanut and eat it, and then examining the brainwave pattern, we'll see that the brainwave pattern is the same as the response to the first peanut. Now, however, it was also observed that suppose we put two monkeys' cages face to face and let a monkey sit in a second cage and watch the monkey in the first cage take the peanut and have the reach and grab mechanism reported in his brain. It was then found that unexpectedly, the second monkey develops the same reach and grab wave pattern that the first monkey sensed or revealed. So repeated tries show that every time the first monkey does monkey reach and grab in response to that peanut, the second one, not having peanuts, will get that same reaction of, oh, I want to reach and grab that, but there's no peanut there for him to reach and grab. So we've had to come and accept that the reach and grab mechanism is something that's universally shared. It's the same brain wave patterning or pattern in the two monkeys, and there must be some machinery in the body that suppresses the motor neurons from causing the monkey to reach and grab that peanut, because there's no peanut for the second monkey to reach and grab. So now we conclude that the brain has two sets of neurons. One's called motor neurons that cause the brain to cause the hand to move and the legs to run and the body to undertake its motions and its normal function. But in addition to those neurons sensing motion and sensing response, sensing the presence of the peanut, there has to be another set of neurons, and that's the motor neurons that get triggered by the first set of neurons, which are the sensing neurons, and that's the total gray matter that develops these brainwave patterns that we study. So there have to be the motor neurons that are switched off in the second monkey in responding to the presence of the arrival of a new peanut in the first monkey's cage. Now, this was noticed in the South Sea Islands. It's said, and I don't know with what scholarship, but it is said that it was noticed that for whatever reason, monkeys on one island would wash a coconut before taking the outer shell off and opening the coconut to eat the coconut meat. And then it was found that spontaneously, another monkey on a nearby island did the same thing. And then another monkey on the adjacent island, and another and another. And you have to ask yourself, so what is it that's being transmitted in monkey brain from one monkey to the next, to the next, to the next, that's causing him to register this? And there must also be these other patterns of motor neurons being shut off and not reaching out for the peanut. We have the motor neuron system, which is partially triggered by something else in the human nervous system, so that the reaction to reach and grab the peanut can be suppressed if that's appropriate. To me, the understanding of separation is a situation in which the brain cannot resonate with other brains, cannot attune to other people's feelings, and therefore is kind of stuck in its own self-retrospection and can too easily get stuck and be annoyed or even annoying. It seems to me that separation is probably related to the lack of stimulus of another person who is sympathetic with you. If I say I'm annoyed by this old mosquito bite, I'm allowing the mosquito bite to annoy me even further. And so to separate from that, I would be inclined to go to my safe space and say, I wonder if there's any mosquitoes around that beautiful chair I have in the living room. Nothing's ever bothered me there. I bet there are no mosquitoes present. And just change the subject to you're being comfortable in a different surroundings, and that putting separation to your advantage, actually. Mm. It's giving you and your mind a place to rest, to escape some other difficult circumstances.
I understand. And you talked about sacred geometry a little bit, or at least you alluded to it, but I would like to ask you about, say, the Fibonacci sequence. Do you think it's a fingerprint of the gods?
While it is that, I think it's likely that that will be a little bit overused. So the answer to the question literally, or the soundbite answer is, oh yes, it's the fingerprint of the gods. But let me say actually what it is. It's a particular pattern of growth in the universe where the new growth is modulated by the previous growth, and so can only achieve a growth, the new growth, that's like 15% or 100% greater than the old growth. So can you see how that produces a Fibonacci sequence? I'm perhaps at the level of 7 in the Fibonacci sequence, but now the next step beyond that might be a 3. And so the next step that 7 amount of growth fosters is all the way up to 10. So the next shell is a 10. And then it can foster even more life by itself, but also adding to that back here at the 7, and maybe there's a 4 and a 3 and a 1 behind that. So that all contributes to this new growth, which will then be arranged in scale and size and amplitude in the Fibonacci sequence number. So the Fibonacci numbers arise naturally according to these patterns of growth in the universe. So you can say that they're sacred and that the universe naturally creates them, but I would be rather one to say that that's just one of the patterns in nature, in the circumstance where growth is fueled by previous growth.
Oh, I like that. Growth is fueled by previous growth.
That's all there is to it.
Job done. It's a wrap. Does consciousness expand in that way?
Yes, very much so. Consciousness uses neural paths in the brain, and so habits are deeply frozen in neural paths. And so the lazy brain, when contemplating food, will go to those neural paths that are strongest and eat the same junk food that it ate yesterday and the day before. And that just reinforces the same brainwave pattern. Mm-hmm. And so habits come about this way as reinforcement of the brainwave system.
I see. And how then do feelings, I've been trying to relate feelings to that sequence, that spiral, that Fibonacci expansion. Can you put that into scientific terms?
I'm not sure I can make a strong connection for you here as I'm thinking about this, because feelings can be brought about by many varied stimuli. A feeling of sadness can be the result of news of the death of a grandmother, or it could be the sadness when my dog died, or it might be the sadness of our present political situation. All of those things bring on sadness, and because these stimuli are so varied, the brain's response to it is necessarily also highly varied. And so there's not one single brain response to sadness, although there are brain commonalities in all expressions or brain experience of sadness. So it's hard to make a very firm rule or statement about exactly what the brain is doing because of different input circumstances and because of different available processes within the brain in response to those stimuli.
I see. Speaking of responses to stimuli, is DNA important in this business of spiritual awakening?
Very much so. And to a large extent, I believe we can affect our DNA in conscious activity. So, have you ever thought deeply about what meditation is?
I have.
And as I have thought about it, I have inferred that, and mind you, this isn't something I read in a book, I have inferred that consciousness is the mind focusing on a sound or a pattern or something which causes it to align the various DNA content of our various organs, which then we call our chakras. So that aligned chakras in which all the DNA is spinning down or up or sideways, but the same sideways, as that gets reinforced, our brain patternings become more powerful. Our ability to sense the state of our vital organs gets amplified. And so we have a stronger experience of our being, our well-being, hopefully, but possibly of our experiences, our feelings of discomfort. All of that can be amplified by these patternings that get amplified within the brain.
We talked about DNA activation, and you just gave me a beautiful example of consciousness and how we can manipulate.
How we can deliberately enhance that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered, do our emotions or our ability to stay in full contact with our emotions have an impact on that process?
Yes. And so from my answer already, you could see that, yes, they very certainly do. And isn't it lucky that they do? Because it's our emotions that allow us to say, I like, or I don't like, and reject.
Yes.
And so in rejecting, we know what to do with our habit patterns there. And in liking, we know what to do with our habit patterns there. Bring it on more.
Yeah, absolutely. So it informs our decisions and our choices about everything, which obviously is our life experience.
That's right.
So what I'm hearing from you, I'm feeling quite empowered. I actually could take command of this thing called life and make it something that's enjoyable to me.
That's what we seek to do in our daily experience, isn't it?
It is.
And you see that it's all a machinery that's built into our bodies, and some people seem to be better at exploiting it than others, and it is something that can be taught. It's very much something that the many conferences, workshops, and the like allow us to bring to our lives and enhance in ourselves and make us spiritually more wholesome beings.
I've developed a bit of a catchphrase, so to speak, to describe how emotions become energy, become timelines. So what I say is emotional states become personality traits, become vibratory rates, become timeline fates. What is your scientific opinion of that?
Oh, what? There's no problem with it, obviously.
That's good to know.
And so my response is, first, bless you for being concerned about the well-being of others and for devoting your life to helping people come to terms with these things that are not functioning optimally. And I would like then to parse the statement a little bit and take it one step at a time.
Yes.
So, in the first place, we say that emotions become our experience and our adoption of patterns that are related to reactions to those emotions. Now, that can work for us, obviously. We learn that when we go to birthday parties, we're always expecting to have a good time because we're celebrating the life of an individual who's achieved new maturity, and we're watching that person's growth. And we expect that to be a joyous and very constructive occasion. So that's a case of emotions then becoming amplified through us and actually then ingrained in us, because every time we have this experience of growth and of more well-being, that makes us want that for ourselves and just makes us exercise those same emotions in ourselves, and we're reinforcing them through that exercising. That's what the brain does. It finds those neural paths that are activated and strengthens those.
Yes.
The more we exercise, the more they strengthen, just like your bodybuilding.
Yeah. And how does that then relate to our life experience in terms of timelines? Are you comfortable with that word?
I see timelines more often used, the word timelines used in a slightly different context. Ordinarily, many people are aware, especially people who do channeling, that they see the possibility that in the future, our society will face severe ecological challenges. And people tell us about them, and they're expected to bring us discomfort because we don't want to think of a situation where this Earth's atmosphere is so polluted that the sunlight cannot nourish plants and ensure our food supply.
The channel that I already mentioned, the hypothetical channel, may be able to pick up on the fact that this possibility is already stored in the universe because it has been held in human consciousness long enough for it to have spread to universal consciousness and to the description of the structure of the universe. And so people describing the channeling of these possibilities as the identification of possible timelines. Those would be timelines where a sequence of imagined events actually takes place. And it might be that the prospects of such timelines cause changes of behavior. And we recognize that if we follow on that timeline, maybe there's crookedness involved, maybe there's legal violations involved. Eventually that will come back to us in a bad way. And there is something we can do about it, and that is to reject those timelines. Or we might worry about the fact that the future has these potential timelines. Maybe we should stock up food.
Yeah.
So the timelines can encourage constructive behaviors or destructive behaviors, which would be the case if somebody said, well, there's nothing I can do about this, I might as well put a gun to my head.
Mm. Yeah.
So it can go either way. And so they don't necessarily have an absolute beneficent side or horrible side.
Yeah, I see. And that suggests to me that if enough of us believe that we are a match to a positive timeline where we sort out our environmental problems, then perhaps that's the one that we can all experience.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. That's it. That's, again, a restatement of the importance of timelines in allowing us to develop a response which may or may not result in motor neuron activities, namely stocking up on emergency supplies.
I see. Do you think there's a tipping point, like a percentage of the population necessary?
No, I'm pretty sure that it's somewhere around 50%, but that's 50 plus or minus 25%. Not much help, is it? I believe that there is going to be more guidance and more input from maybe the religious community or the philosophical community will have opinions about this too. And so it's not entirely the purview of the brain community to sound off on these possibilities and these possible timelines. Other people are allowed to have opinions as well. And it's our job then to put all of this together to decide what's the best way forward.
Yes, absolutely. And I hope that this brings people together.
I'm hoping that at some point we're going to talk about the near-death experience. I
would love that. Let's go there.
Something that's in your...
Absolutely. Can you elaborate on that?
I would like to elaborate on several aspects of the near-death experience because I have seen things in my life which help me to understand what obviously is going on. So in the first place, there is the culturally conditioned part that people talk about in their near-death experience when they talk about they're reviewing all the principal events in their lifetime and thinking about, well, has that been successful overall or a failure overall? And I honestly believe that this review, or life review it's sometimes called, has a very, very important role in ending our lives where this near-death experience is occurring.
Mm.
In the first place, I want to emphasize that it's culturally conditioned, that we bring with us at this moment a lot of our knowledge about our civilization in which we've experienced our lives. So that where I might imagine driving back to Chicago, the city of my origin, and seeing and visiting in my mind some of the places that are in or around Chicago and thinking about my experiences there, if I talk to a Native American, they will talk about the same events in the context of being on the shoulders of a soaring eagle.
Yeah.
And that eagle taking them to fly by the home where they were raised and to fly by where a great battle occurred that they took a part in and are now remembering the outcome of that battle, perhaps with sadness, and the eagle taking them on their flight of life rediscovery. Now, in our biblical tradition and in our religion, we talk about there being a judgment associated with this life review. And I believe that what's involved here is the fact that people tell us that We made a bargain before we were born that our life, now as a prospective life, had for us the prospect of allowing us to learn some things about interacting with other people, or to have a life of a great scientist, or to be whatever. And when we learn now at death what the purpose of our life was, then those experiences of our lives have a context. We now can understand those principal experiences of being raised in poverty, how that affected what we brought to other individuals in our civilization, in our life experience, and we judge ourselves. It's a continuous process of knowing now what the purpose was, and that's the context for what the realization in our life was, giving us an opportunity to come to terms of how successful this life was. And do I have to go back and relearn this? That's a judgment we're now in a position to make. I succeeded in this life in meeting my objectives. I'm ready to go on to something else. Or I sure made a mess of that.
Yeah.
From the get-go. I just never got it that we're all interdependent. And I thought I was going to be the cowboy that was going to fire silver bullets, and it just didn't work out that way. Where did I go wrong? I'm going to have to do it all over again. Can you see how that's a very different concept of your life review? It's not so much about the guy in the sky giving you 1 star, 2 stars, or 3 stars.
No.
Or condemning you to eternal damnation. It's rather about giving you what you need for you to see for yourself and realize what you really did brilliantly, but at the same time, what you really messed up.
Yes.
Watch out for the judgment.
Yes.
Isn't that a fascinatingly different idea of what then people are experiencing and describing in their near-death experience?
It really is. And it makes me think there is, most of us buy into some sort of punishing something that comes at the end. But actually what you're saying is science is pointing in the direction of we actually are the ones who do our own life reviews. We're now equipped
to see them in the context of what was to be the purpose of our lives. And did we accomplish that purpose? Or did we, in fact, even go the opposite direction?
Yeah. And that puts it in a context, which makes me want to do better.
That's right.
It's a great cosmic lesson plan.
Right. So I can move on to the next lesson plan.
Yes. So you're suggesting there's more.
So there is in so many religions a tradition of an afterlife and a rebirth, and take your pick of if it's going to be a rebirth on Earth or in another civilization, on another planet, around another star. So it'll immediately get complicated. But yes, I believe that answered the question, that the death experience allows you to come to a comfort about what your life has been and how that fits in with your needs.
You mentioned yesterday energy being stored in the rocks of, say, we were talking about Stonehenge. We also, a lot of the film will be set in Malta. And so I'm wondering, because Malta has per capita more ancient sites than anywhere in the world.
I didn't know that.
It does. I'm wondering, what is the power of these sites? And how can sacred knowledge or energy be stored in them?
Yes, very good. In the first place, it has been noticed that there seem to be some optimum places to have sacred sites. Mystics using dowsing rods, or who knows what they do, can sense and tune into the experience that there's a lot of spiritual energy present here at this place. And it's even been noticed that they tend to be linear. And some people have noticed that if you plot some of the great cathedrals in Europe, you will see that they're on nearly straight lines. And it's even a marvel that their surveying was good enough for them to draw such a straight line over distances of 1,000 miles. Or did they maybe not have to draw that line? Did another mystic come along and identify the sites by the same criteria of response to dowsing or to feeling of an intense spiritual presence at this other site without knowing that it's a line on a map? Now, some people, like Caroline Cole, have actually developed and devised a theory where the unfoldment in space, or the creation of space out of nothing, leaves these what are called ley lines, where there is a natural, strong coherence between the atoms that occur at these ley lines. And they are energetically very powerful because they are at the seat of very strong quantum coherence in the universe. And that's a big word that takes us in a direction that we haven't gone yet. But by quantum coherence, I mean that if you have a conscious experience here, the universe easily finds it in a nearby grouping of physical matter, another grouping of physical matter, and another, and another, and another, so that a separate party in another location might find and recognize these experiences in his mind and notice that, oh, here they're very attuned to a 440. They're attuned to the musical note at 440 hertz. Isn't that interesting? And there is then an understanding in quantum physics of how the universe creates such coherent paths that then can be tuned into and located and then surfed along so that you can have that experience shared with other people. And that's at the root of remote viewing.
I see.
Can you see that if I can know something about the DNA of bin Laden's driver, it's possible that I can find that there's a connection in the universe through coherence that connects my mind along this, what would previously have been called a wormhole, but Edgar Mitchell and I would call a coherent, structured path in the universe to that place where bin Laden's driver is. And then my mind can tune into his vision experienced at that remote location, and I can describe what I see, which is what bin Laden's driver sees in the cave. And we bring it up in the context of remote viewing because the CIA was paying Russell Targ big bucks to teach practitioners how to do this. So there's no reasonable doubt that this is possible, that it's happening in our universe, and that there are people who will describe what they do in their experience. And I refer you then to the published works of Russell Targ.
Mm-hmm.
But we can understand exactly what's going on in the context of simpatico experience all along these ley lines, which foster that kind of sympathy or simpatico or sympathetic experience, and are hotbeds of it along lines which we've recognized by other means at other times, so they have permanence, and we've cited our most sacred sites along that same line for the correct reason.
Absolutely. And you've just described to me the science behind psychic phenomenon, which is so cool.
Yes. Right.
One question I have for you on a personal note, I've always been able to see auras. I see light around the human figure. It has different colors, textures, shapes. Sometimes I can see where it perhaps is more tainted or dull, etc. What am I seeing?
You're something that's real. You're seeing something that's real. You're seeing something which is created by the conscious wave that describes your body physically, but is joined by your consciousness wave, which is generated primarily in your brain, and it energizes the part of the wave that's just describing your physical matter. But when that part of your description, the physical wave part, is energized, there's something that leaks over into luminescence, and a very highly attuned person can recognize that luminescence as reflecting your true being and the true nature of your physical body. So it's an interplay between those waves, quantum waves, describing physical being, interplaying with those that describe your quantum essence and quantum processing.
So is that quantum essence then, could that also explain what we see when we see a ghost?
Absolutely. That ghost is comfortable in that place. It's likely that there are ghosts in this house. I've had it said by people entering my home that, oh, there's a ghost around here. He's actually rather friendly. Mm. I see him wearing a cowboy hat. Wow, cowboy ghost, the first. Well, it turns out that the first owner of this house cited a house here because there were cattle operations here at Porter Square. Porter Square was the last stop of the Transcontinental Railroad, and the cattle cars were unloaded outside of the city of Boston, here at Porter Square, where they were driven overland and even across the river to the stockyards in Alston, Brighton. And so the owner of the house would probably have worn a cowboy hat as an affectation for the fact that he is standing on the shoulder of all those rancher guys out in the cattle in the western part of the country where the cattle were raised. And the cattle bring along the cowboy hat, basically.
That's fabulous. I'm glad he's nice.
A friendly ghost.
A friendly ghost. I promise it's the last question. I want to know about the Akashic Records. And you do talk about MECOs, and it might be a long answer, but if you can, put it in a nutshell version for us.
Okay.
What are the Akashic Records?
The equivalent, the Akashic Records first have their origin in the Vedic Indian traditions, but many, many people have discovered them independently. And we talk about our spiritual essence, and we talk about the things that we bring from past lives to our present life. And there are people who study the phenomena of past lives as they reflect present lives of some individuals by their reporting. Anyway, we therefore have to accept that there is some machinery in the universe that allows our lives to be cumulative, to be adding up. That is, past lives contribute to our present life. It's an idea that simply makes sense to me. as it did to the Vedic scholars, and many other people had the same thought throughout history, and it's originated in the Native American community and in other communities of thought as well. So it has some permanence, and it is not to be ignored. I believe that the Christian idea of soul is very close to the Vedic tradition, where the Vedic tradition is more tied up with the sense of just collecting up information about your past lives, whereas the Christian tradition of soul brings in more judgmentalism into the discussion. We then see it as the basis for which people are judged in some other realm and sent to eternal damnation or into eternal glory. So different religions have taken their own stance on the meaning of it, but the core experience is fairly easily recognized, understood, and described in many communities in similar vocabulary.
And we can tap into it then?
Absolutely. And it's not surprising that, in fact, another person in your company can tap into your personal history in this way.
And do our feelings have a way of transmitting data back to the Akashic Records?
Very much so. Let's say that our feelings inform our soul. And the universe does this by sorting and collecting them at the black hole objects, which record the past history of this quantum hologram. Remember that we talk about how the black hole object has the universe packed up on its surface, and it allows us to tap into what was the quantum hologram describing our universe a minute ago, a day ago, a month ago, a year ago, and even the age of the universe ago. We now recognize that some of the black hole objects that we see have been in existence for the entire age of the universe. And for that reason, are able to store the entire past history of the beings and the consciousness that existed in the universe in all times past and present. Quite remarkable.
That is incredibly remarkable. I think that's a perfect place to end.